idols. He even caused his children to pass through the fire, sacrificed them something. I think it was Molech is the one that was one of the ones that they did this kind of worship with, where they sacrificed their children in fire to this pagan god. And not only did he do that, but when he was being besieged by his cousins from the northern kingdom and from the king of Syria, he didn't go to God and say, I need your help. He went to the king of Assyria and said, I'm your son, I'm your servant. Come up and help me. And what he did was he basically took all the silver and gold he could out of the temple and out of his king's treasuries, and took it to the king of Syria to try to get him to help him. Well, the king of Assyria did. And what he did was he went and he attacked Syria, and he conquered Syria, took them into captivity, and it relieved the pressure for a little while on Judah. But he also did some other bad things. It says that he, once this happened, he went up to Syria and met with the king of Syria after he'd been beaten badly by the Assyrians, and he saw this altar that was there, and he got all the specifications for it. He went to one of his priests and said, I want you to build me an altar just like that. He built this altar and he set it up, and he began to use that to offer sacrifices to pagan gods. Not only did he do that, but he took a altar that was in the temple area, had it brought there to do the same thing with. So he did a lot of just terrible, just bad things, not only for himself, but he led the people right back to where they were before the days of his father. And so he did some really terrible things during his reign. The first part of chapter 3 talks about the judgment on princes and the prophets. In Micah chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, it says, And I said, Hear now, O heads of Jacob, and you rulers of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know justice? You who hate good and love evil, who strip the skin of my people and the flesh from their bones, who also eat the flesh of my people and flay their skin from them, break their bones and chop them into pieces like meat for the pot, like flesh in the cauldron. Then they will cry to the Lord, but I will not hear them. He will even hide his face from them at that time, because they had been evil in their deeds. Thus says the Lord concerning the prophets who make my people stray, who chant peace while they chew with their teeth, but who prepare war against him, who put nothing into their mouths. Again, this is not a continuation of chapters 1 and 2. It's an introduction to a messianic message. It will be coming in chapters 4 and 5, and that's from Homer Haley. And also, Mr. Kaufman also agrees with this assessment by Haley. It's directed squarely against Judah. Now, it does say the house of Jacob, talking about all the children of Israel, but really, often you'll see a larger part being really referred to a smaller portion, or a smaller portion meaning the whole thing. Just style of writing, but it's directed against Judah. And it's saying that the people, the guardians of justice, these princes who are supposed to be those who know the law, they don't know what justice is. They're supposed to be administering justice. They don't know what justice is. They're not really interested in what justice is, because if they are crooked, they can make a lot more money, doing these things against people unfairly, because other people will pay them money to do the wrong thing rather than the right thing, or they can oppress people in a lot of different ways and be able to profit from that by gaining land, by gaining power, and other things. It says that they hate good and they love evil. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20, Isaiah starts that off by saying, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." And here we're at a point where the people who are supposed to be administering justice, doing good to their people to make sure that people are taken care of, are doing evil against them. They would rather do evil against them and be rather than doing the right thing. And God says that in the day, and he's talking about when these people get punished, when the judgment comes, he's not going to listen to these people who have been so evil to their own people. He won't listen to them. In Isaiah chapter 59, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened, that it cannot save, nor his ear heavy, that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you, so that he will not hear." So here we see that God is saying, when the time comes for your judgment, you're going to cry out to me and say, "Where are you? I need your help." I'm not going to listen to you. Not because I don't have power, not because I can't stop this. I'm not. And it's not because of any power that I lack. It's because of your sin against my people. And in verse 6, he also talks about the priests. He says they bite like serpents. Matthew chapter 23, verse 33, when Jesus is criticizing the scribes and the Pharisees, he calls them the serpents and brood of vipers. So they didn't change a whole lot between the time of Micah's days and the time of Jesus, when he called them also serpents. And he says that the things that they do are like a venom to the people. In a couple different ways is that they're not taking care of them to start off with, but some of the things that they are telling them is directly different, or in direct opposition of what God wants them to do. So the directions they're giving are the wrong directions to people, and it's causing harm to the people because of that. So that their bite is like serpents. He continues in verses 6 through 8. He says, "Therefore you shall have night without vision, and you shall have darkness without divination. The sun shall go down on the prophets, and the day shall be dark for them. So the seers shall be ashamed, and the diviners abashed. Indeed, they shall all cover their lips, for there is no answer from God. But truly, I am full of power by the Spirit of the Lord, and of justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, and to Israel its sin." So here he's continues in this line talking about the prophets. He says that the sun was going to go down on their prosperity, not only just for the prophets, but for the nation of Israel as a whole. But specifically for the prophets, the sun would go down. Their night, they would have night upon their glory. It was going to come to an end. What they were doing at that point, any kind of prosperity they were enjoying, any good things that were going on for them in the way of ease, was all going to end, and life was getting ready to get very difficult for them, for the entire nation. Back up. But the prophets would get no revelation from God, and that they would be without power and without vision. But on the other hand, Micah says that he was still full of power from God to declare to Jacob his transgression. There were a lot of pride during those days, and if you go back to the book of Jeremiah, when he would go and he would prophesy, there would be a lot of prophets that would say, "Don't listen to him; those things aren't going to happen. It's going to be like this. Don't become alarmed at what this person says." And during the days of Jeremiah, that would happen later, the last days before the captivity, Babylonian captivity, there were a lot of prophets saying, "Don't listen to Jeremiah. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Listen to me. I know what's going on. We're not going to, but God isn't going to let this happen." And here, these prophets are not going to get anything from God. They're going to be without power. And so they're not going to get anything. And there were also false prophets that were just making things up because they were not getting anything from God. But Micah says he still had power that he was going to give. That he could tell the people things that were coming from God about the transgressions of the nation. And then we have a promise of this future judgment in verses 9 through 12. And he says, "Now hear this, the heads of the house of Jacob and the rulers of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all equity, who build up Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with iniquity. Her heads judge for a bribe, her priests teach for pay, and her prophets divine for money. Yet they lean on the Lord and say, Is not the Lord among us? No harm can come upon us. Therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed like a field. Jerusalem shall become heaps of ruins, and the mountains of the temple shall be bare like the hills of the forest." He talks about the listing of Judah's sins in verses 9 through 11. He says that the people who are in positions of authority and power over people, he says they hate justice, that they pervert equity. They build up Zion, or Jerusalem, or Judah, with bloodshed, and Jerusalem with iniquity. They're building it up. They're building up. The city may be prospering, but it's being built on because of bad things that are happening. Excuse me. And he says that the judges judge for a bribe, and the priests teach for pay, and the prophets divine for money. So they had this whole list of sins that were being discussed in verses 9 through 11. And he says, because of this, in verse 12, that Zion, he's talking about Jerusalem, would be plowed like a field. Well, not just Jerusalem, really, because when the Assyrians came, they did a lot of damage through the whole nation, and Jerusalem was kind of the pinnacle of that. So it'll be plowed like a field. It'll be left in ruins. You see in the springtime here when the farmers go in and they plow a field, everything's gone. Any undergrowth, anything that was there before, it's gone. Well, that's kind of what happened to Jerusalem when the Assyrians finished with it. When the Babylonians finished with it. They came in and after they burned the temple, they destroyed the walls. Everything came down. Mr. Kaufman said that recently they found an area of Jerusalem. He said it was in the southeast part of Jerusalem. It was kind of undiscovered for a long time. That was actually the site of the original Jerusalem. And he said even today, when he wrote the book, he wrote his commentary, that part of Jerusalem was still being used as fields, and they were still plowed. There was nothing there that was, buildings there. It was all plowed fields. And he says even to the day that when he was writing his commentary, that part of Jerusalem was still plowed like a field. It had never been built up again, which I thought was kind of interesting. Any questions, comments on chapter 3? Then we move into chapter 4. Chapter 4 verses 1 through 5. Mr. Kaufman says that this is a promise of the coming kingdom. This is a prophecy about the church being established in the first century. So in chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and the people shall flow to it. Many nations shall come and say, Come, and let us go up on the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion the law shall go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and rebuke strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But everyone shall sit under his vine and under his fig tree. No one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all people walk each in the name of his God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Mr. Kaufman says that this is the citadel of Old Testament prophecy. It is the revealing of the coming of the Lord's church in the first century. At this period of time, what he's talking about in these latter days, he says that Satan is vanquished, the light of truth is lighted, the coming of the Son of God is at hand, and we see the establishment of the kingdom occurring in this passage here. Now, he says this is don't mistake this as being a prophecy of Judah coming back from the captivity in Babylon. This has a much larger scope than the remnant coming back from Babylon in captivity and building Jerusalem back up. This is a promise of the Messiah coming that had been promised for all those generations, and a looking forward of the church being established. And he talks in this book, in this passage, he talks about the latter days. He's talking about the Christian era. He's talking about the time when Jesus comes, and his time on earth, and then the establishment of the church, and the era we live in today. And in Hebrews 1 and 2, let's go and try to read that. Hebrews 1 and 2, it says, let me get to it. It says, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, like Micah, who has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he has made the worlds. So here we see that the focus shifted from the prophets to Jesus. A new day has dawned, according to the writer of Hebrews. And he says that many nations will be part of the Lord's kingdom. If you go to Acts chapter 2 and you look at verses 5 and 6, it says basically that every nation was represented, can't even talk tonight. Every nation or people from all nations under the heavens were represented there at the day of Pentecost. So we see people from all over, not just Jews, not just Hebrews. All people come together are part of the church. It's not restricted just to Jews. It's Jews and Gentiles, and we should be eternally grateful that it was open to us as well. And it would begin in Jerusalem. If you remember when Jesus, just as before he ascended, he told his disciples that go into the city, remain there. When you receive power, you're going to be witnesses to me in Jerusalem and Judea and in Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And that's exactly what happened. The church was established in Jerusalem. It grew there. It grew into Judea. It went into Samaria, and then it went all over, just as it was prophesied here. Mr. Kaufman says, don't mistake this. He said there are those who would say that this is when the millennium is going to happen. Christ is going to come back, and he's going to reign for 1,000 years on earth, and this is the millennium where everybody's going to be, all the evil people are going to be brought basically into one people, and there's going to be peace. And this is not what he's talking about. That is a false doctrine. He says that this is, when he's talking about this is the spirit or the character of the kingdom of spiritual Zion, that there's going to be peace between people from one nation or another nation who are Christians. They're not going to be at odds with each other. They're going to be brothers because they both have a common cause and a common goal. You can go to different countries throughout the world right now, and you can find the Lord's church, and you're among friends. You may not know anybody there. The countries might have been physical enemies at one time, but there's Christians there. There may be conflict in other ways, but Christians are at peace with each other, relatively speaking. I'll pick up there next week, and we'll move on and finish chapter 4 and try to finish chapter 5 next week. Thanks so much.